Dear friends, dear guests, it gives me great pleasure, and I'm very proud as PwC to be hosting you in our exciting experience center, and to also be sponsoring this very, very important and innovative event. When we envisaged the creation of this space, we actually envisaged for this very type of events that bring together different stakeholders and provide a platform, a space, a methodology for inspiration, for co-creation. And this specific event hits so many of those aspirations that we had on the way that we could be using this space. It's an event that will talk about one of our very fundamental sectors of the economy, shipping, but it's also an event that talks about sustainable shipping. It touches upon ESG. It touches upon a methodology of SWOTing, the idea of establishing with clarity, with good data, the landscape within which somebody will actually do informed solutioning for the future. It touches upon the bringing together of different stakeholders across the full spectrum of the economy, regulators, economists, industry experts, the public sector, the private sector at large. And part of our vision has always been that it is indeed through this synthesis of different diverse perspectives that once we bring them together, we can actually achieve so much innovation and so much solutioning on moving beyond the day-to-day problems that I'm sure will be identified in the discussion of the weaknesses side of the SWOT. What gives me particular pleasure is the fact that this is very much within that same spirit and vision of the fact that we as PwC contributed with the support of the European Commission in developing for the country what we call Cyprus Vision 2035, and the long-term strategic plan that will take the country in that direction. And everything that we'll be discussing today is very much part of that future that we have been aspiring for the country. Finally, I would like to put some specific emphasis and congratulate the minister himself, Vasilis Dimitriadis, but also the deputy ministry as a team, for the fact that they have taken this initiative as an ownership by themselves, and the fact that this event pretty much belongs to them. We are hosting and facilitating, but it's run by the ministry. And the fact that we have the public sector opening up to the international community, and we have people here, I understand more than 400 people from different countries all the way to Mexico, brains coming together from different geographies, hosted by Cyprus and initiated by Cyprus on something that is at the forefront of green shipping, green fuels, sustainability, ESG, gives me tremendous pride as a Cypriot, and also is a bright example of how Cyprus can play, how the public sector can play for the future, but how we all together as stakeholders co-creating for the future can bring so much value to each other and to the economies, not only of territories like Cyprus, but globally, because we will be discussing global issues that demand global solutioning. So a big thank you to all the participants that have joined in, both here physically in the Experience Center here in Nicosia, Cyprus, but also all of you virtually connecting to this event. The fact that it's a hybrid event in itself also is another big advantage to our ability to be connecting brains across the globe. So with that introduction, let me pass over to the Master of Ceremonies, the Minister himself, Vasilis Dimitriadis.
A warm welcome to our participants attending physically and virtual. A million thanks to our host, to this impressive experience center of PwC here in Nicosia and its great team of visionaries, designers, problem solvers, and doers. And of course, a million thanks to the University of Houston, the Department of Energy and Innovation, from sharing our initiative, from supporting and willing to contribute to today's event. Cyprus, strategic vision for shipping sea change 2030, one of its major objectives is to contribute positively to global shipping. And of course, to actively contribute and to the deliberations at global and European level and facilitate discussions when it comes to great challenges. And of course, decarbonization is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, challenge that this sector is facing today. As regulators, we have the responsibility to facilitate and manage to provide solutions in the short term to make operational and technical measures to work in this very difficult transitional period, in this very difficult decarbonization path. But at the same time, we need to find ways to accelerate the take-up of alternative fuels, especially non-fossil fuels. So I do know that there are discussions at global level for a research and innovation fund, discussions within the EU for having maritime fund within the innovation fund, or a separate maritime fund to target and focus and invest on R&I for shipping. It's very important as regulators to be fuel technology neutral, but at the same time, we need to ensure that any fund has the right governance, has a targeted research approach in order to speed up the efforts to accelerate the take-up of alternative fuels. I'm very well aware that there are a number of studies and reports across the globe from many esteemed organizations in relation to several fuels, which are very valuable sources for us as regulators. But today's exercise is very different. It's all about a live SWOT analysis, a collaborative exercise, giving the opportunity from all of us to build this SWOT analysis together, to exchange views and elaborate the prospects of these fuels, having, of course, into the perspective that we have to listen first to our scientists and then give the opportunity to all of us to contribute and submit your views, your feedbacks, your ideas. I would like to invite on stage Mr. Chris Angelidis, representing the University of Houston, from his short introductory remarks. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister. Glad to be here with all of you. The shipping industry is critical when it comes to decarbonizing the world and when it comes to the pathway to a net zero world. And of course, Houston is not just the energy capital of the world, as we like to think of it, but it's also a major port and very much linked to the shipping industry. So it should come as no surprise to you that the University of Houston, a tier 1 academic and research institution, is very much focused on energy transition issues. Last year, with a gift from Shell USA, the Energy Transition Institute was created. And the Energy Transition Institute is focused on, among other things, low carbon fuels, circularity, carbon capture, and all of the relevant issues to decarbonization. And so when the ministry approached us with this idea, we were very, very keen to join. This is an opportunity to exchange views, and I am keen to participate in this discussion along with my colleagues from Houston. So thank you again, and we look forward to the discussion.
Well, thanks, Chris. Now it's time to kick off, and let me explain a bit the choreography and how we are going to work today. We are having 4 sessions covering hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels, and methanol. 38 minutes per session. For each session, we are having 2 panelists. I don't say them panelists, but scene setters actually, where they will present their scientific knowledge on each fuel, covering both the academic perspective, but also addressed and focus on the industry's needs. 8 minutes each, and then we open the floor for 15 minutes, allowing interventions of maximum 90 seconds per intervention to fill the SWOT analysis, but also there's going to be a QR code that you can scan, access, and submit comments, questions, or contributions in writing. And the takeaways of today's hybrid event is, of course, the 4 SWOT analysis that we are going to build today, followed in the forthcoming days by a more detailed conclusions that we are going to share with the global and EU regulators and with all of you, of course. And what I'm expecting today as a moderator from today's discussion is to address these 4 fuel technologies, addressing the perspective of availability, safety risk, the time that we are expecting this to mature, because this is very important if we want to prioritize research at a later stage. The risk element I already mentioned, and of course, the life cycle of the fuel, and what is important also, the well to wake, because we are not, our responsibility is not only to make shipping cleaner, but to use alternative fuels that are from green sources. So from the production side to the actual use. So I'm opening now the session of hydrogen. We have with us Dr. Powell. Good afternoon, good morning, Houston. I don't know if Dr. Powell is with us. Good morning, I guess it's for you, Dr. Powell. We are very happy to have you with us today. The floor is yours. You have 8 minutes to express your views, your ideas, your scientific knowledge in relation to hydrogen as a marine fuel. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Minister, for that introduction, and Chris. It's great to be here today. Again, I'm Joe Powell, Executive Director of the University of Houston Energy Transition Institute, former Shell Chief Scientist, Chemical Engineering, and also former Chair of the US DOE's Hydrogen Technical Advisory Committee. So I'll be kicking off with the talk on hydrogen for decarbonization of marine shipping today. So transportation accounts for 23% of global greenhouse gas emissions. 12% of that, or nearly 3% of the total emissions, arise from the maritime sector. Next slide. Low cost renewable and solar and wind energy are driving the transition to clean decarbonized energy. And one should always ask the question, why not electrify? Because for the first time in the history of energy, the lowest cost pathway produces electricity first, instead of storable and transportable fuels. It takes twice as much energy to make hydrogen from renewable electricity. Let's have the next slide, please. And twice as much again to make synthetic liquid hydrocarbon fuels, such as diesel or methanol, from hydrogen and captured CO2 to replace the fuels we use today. So we always ask the question, why not electrify first? And why do we need to consider these liquid and storable fuels. Next slide, please. So energy density is key. The mass and volume of fuel plus container must be considered in replacing today's marine fuel oil or diesel. While hydrogen is the lightest molecule and has the best energy density per mass, it requires high pressure cylinders or low temperatures for containment. So its system density is only about 1/7 that of diesel or marine fuel oil, meaning it takes up to 7 times more space on the vessel in liquid hydrogen form, or even worse if stored as a high pressure gas at 350 to 700 atmospheres. The amount of energy stored is, however, more than 10 times better than the best batteries that are available today or will be for the foreseeable future. So despite the cycle efficiency of batteries, they do not provide the amount of energy storage needed to power shipping beyond the smallest of harbor craft. We need molecular carriers or fuels as considered in this forum for high energy and power density applications in marine transport. Next slide, please. Liquid hydrogen. Due to its density, liquid hydrogen is the most attractive form for storing hydrogen as a shipping fuel. It requires temperature as low as -253 degrees for storage at ambient pressure, or can be stored under cryo-compressed conditions at pressures up to 240 atmospheres. Boil-off rates are a problem given imperfect insulation. So hydrogen can be isomerized over a catalyst to convert naturally occurring orthopara hydrogen to para-para to reduce vapor pressure and boil off, but that requires added capital expense. In addition to the large cooling requirement needed to liquefy hydrogen, which can consume up to 30% of its embodied energy. A demonstration vessel to transport liquid hydrogen between Australia and Japan is now operational. But new methods to insulate larger dimension tanks must be developed before the technology is ready to go commercial in about 2030 and beyond. If successful, liquid hydrogen, or LH2, can replace liquefied natural gas, or LNG, as a clean, low, or zero carbon energy vector. Next slide. Maritime vessels. The largest ships are the biggest global emitters of CO2. However, there are many size vessels which come into play in the maritime sector. The smallest craft can be electrified with battery storage. Hydrogen can play a key role in intermediate sized harbor craft and ferries, with increased power and energy density allowed over batteries. Infrastructure to support refueling of intermediate scale harbor craft can synergize with uses of hydrogen and heavy duty drayage trucks, lift trucks, and equipment that's present at ports. So all of this must operate 24/7 and will require, for operations that require that faster refueling time as afforded by hydrogen versus battery electric recharging, which takes considerable time in commercial operations. So hydrogen has a refueling advantage over batteries in the smaller range of the shipping sector. Next slide, please. Hydrogen today can be made by reforming of natural gas with capture and subsurface storage of CO2. Depending on natural gas price, this so-called blue hydrogen can be produced at $1 to $2 a kilogram or gallon of fuel equivalent. It requires a location where the geology allows safe subsurface storage of CO2, which is present many places in the world, but not everywhere. Adding another $2 for transport, storage, compression, and dispensing, hydrogen can be delivered to vehicles or ships at roughly $3 to $6 a gallon equivalent if done at scale, which is often competitive with diesel and fuels today. Green hydrogen can be made by electrolysis of water virtually anywhere in the world. Prices of renewable energy are decreasing, as is the cost of electrolyzers, such that green hydrogen via electrolysis is expected to be competitive from natural gas by 2030 and beyond. Next slide, please. So Shell Deloitte did a study with query of the marine industry, and 65% of respondents projected a role for hydrogen in future maritime operations. both with internal combustion as well as electric driven engines powered by fuel cell. Next slide, please. So ARENA also has done a study, and they are showing 10% usage of hydrogen as a maritime fuel by 2050. ARENA is the International Renewable Energy Association, but not nearly as much use for hydrogen as ammonia, which dominates, or LNG, advanced biofuels, and methanol. So let's get to the SWOT. Next slide, please. To get you started, to summarize, hydrogen offers zero CO2 emissions and zero or low or other pollutants, such as smog and other criteria pollutants from the engine or fuel cell exhaust. It is expected to achieve cost parity in total cost of ownership versus diesel and maritime fuels by 2035, given the lower maintenance costs for electric drive engines if powered by fuel cell. It's not toxic. The cost of hydrogen drops with integrated cross-sector uses and in the emerging hydrogen economy, and that leverages further developments in fuel cell costs and durability. Infrastructure does not exist today, however, for hydrogen marine fuel distribution and bunkering. Hydrogen is highly flammable, and boil off limits distance and time for shipping. There's about a 30% energy loss in liquefaction unless heat integration options are available. Liquid storage at scale is needed for shipping, but is not proven fully at commercial scale at this time and requires development, being ready about 2030 and beyond. Storage density, including containment, is only about 15 to 20% of that of current marine fuel oil. So with that, I have completed, and thank you very much for your time.
Right on stage, Dr. John Kogarakis, who is attending physically, of course, and is here with us to present his views about hydrogen. Dr. Kogarakis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very important event. I feel compelled to thank the ministry and the minister, Vasilis Dimitriadis, for organizing this event, PwC for hosting, for their hospitality of the SWOTing of the fuels, University of Houston for their great contribution to the cross-pollination of knowledge, and of course, last but not least, all of you participating. I would like to quote the words of the great visionary of 19th century, Jules Verne, that water will be the coal of the future. Indeed, NASA utilizes hydrogen in their space exploration. Space shuttle is moved by the energy produced by the exothermic reaction between oxygen and hydrogen. Hydrogen is produced in various ways. The most, the one that produces the highest amount of carbon dioxide, the one that is primarily used today is the reaction between methane and water, steam, the so-called steam reforming method. There are many other ways. Also, alternatively, is electrolysis of water, splitting water in hydrogen and oxygen with input of electricity. And of course, the source of electricity is what differentiates the one that produces carbon dioxide, the production that produces carbon dioxide, and the one that doesn't. So utilization of renewable sources of energy will result to the so-called green hydrogen. This is our target. Unfortunately, this comes at a price. Green hydrogen costs a little bit more depending on where you are. It could be as high as $7 to $10 per kilogram. Our target is to achieve a price of less than 2 kilograms, the $2 per kilogram of green hydrogen. Another method, I don't know, it doesn't go. Another method, of course, is based on biomimetics, utilization of techniques of the nature to provide hydrogen with biological means. And we have in nature natural catalysts like clusters of manganese and oxygen, the so-called cubane catalysts that they split the water in hydrogen and oxygen. Easy to do in the laboratory, more difficult in real life. So like we said, the power of upscaling. Today we need 300 million tons of fuel, heavy fuel oil for our fleets, for the global fleet of shipping. So the idea is if we are going to have the hydrogen to be the king of the future multi-fuel society, we will need to increase the scale of production. Increasing the scale of production will achieve the target, as you can see, with renewable sources of electricity, will achieve the target of less than $2 per kilogram. Let's see. It is going forward. We can see that the hydrogen is a critical problem, as it was mentioned by Professor Powell. A critical issue is its transportation and storage. It is advisable to be transported for ocean-going vessels to be transported as a liquid. But if we store it under atmospheric pressure, we would need a temperature close to absolute zero, minus 253 degrees Celsius. That means that we're going to have a lot of losses, a lot of gas boiling off because of the ingress of heat. Alternatively, we can store it as for smaller, lower quantities as a gas under high pressure. We can store it in chemical compounds with more prominent ammonia. Ammonia is probably the compound that stores the highest quantities of hydrogen. We have the liquid organic hydrogen carriers. More exotic means are the metal organic frameworks and the metal hydrides that can, if coerced, can release hydrogen. Metal organic frameworks are compounds with very high surface area. 1 gram of such a compound can have a surface equal to a football field. Very promising. Technology is still going in that area. The hydrogen is very flexible in its utilization. It can be burned in internal combustion engines and also can be used in fuel cells where the chemical energy is converted into electricity. We have only one conversion, so fuel cells have very high efficiency. But when we use hydrogen in a fuel cell, the requirement is that it is of very high purity. Another promising fact is when we do renewable sources to do the electrolysis, we do it typically offshore where the winds are higher. We can electrolyze the water, create hydrogen, and then liquefy it and carry it on shore. Let's keep in mind that it is not only electricity that we need, it is also the water. We need about 9 tons of water to produce 1 ton of hydrogen. So this is good news for countries that are blessed with high resources in water and sun. And I believe Cyprus is one of them. Barriers for the proliferation of hydrogen fuel in shipping is, a lot of them were mentioned by Professor Powell, the lack of bunkering infrastructure, the difficulty to carry it. The other problem is, of course, its flammability, but one of the solutions that was proposed by the visionary, by Jules Verne, is to produce it on board the vessel. And this is a future target. We can produce hydrogen by electrolyzing seawater. This has been tried, and it could be the way to do it in the future. I believe submarines utilize this kind of technology. Interestingly enough, hydrogen is explosive, has knocking effects, and burns invisibly. Because of its high diffusivity, it goes up in the air, and if you find yourselves in a fire, it's much preferable to find yourselves in a hydrogen fire as opposed to a fire involving gasoline, for example. Finishing my presentation, I would like to point out that hydrogen is the mother of all fuels. It is going to be a basic feedstock to create zero carbon fuels, also called synthetic or electronic fuels. Producing hydrogen with renewable sources of energy, like wind, solar panels, or other renewable sources, electrolysis, we produce hydrogen and oxygen goes up in the air. And if we unite that with carbon for carbonaceous fuels like methane, methanol, and crude oil, we can produce synthetic fuels. Nitrogen from the air and hydrogen can produce ammonia, which is the major means of producing hydrogen. And a parting word, to make acceptance of hydrogen better for the public, is that hydrogen, contrary to popular belief, was not responsible for the Hindenburg accident. It was found that the lacquer in the wooden frame of the Hindenburg was the one that initiated the fire. And of course, after the fire was there, hydrogen was actually burned. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks for this enlightening contribution. And it's always wise to start with the mother of fuels, as you very, very correctly indicated from you. Thank you.
I thank you too.
So now it's time to turn to our audience. As I mentioned before, we will open the floor. So feel free to intervene. You have, each one of you will have 90 seconds to orally submit your contribution or to fill the gaps in the SWOT analysis. And you've seen on your screens now the QR code. You can scan it, access it, and submit your comments in writing. So you will see now appearing on our screen a template of this SWOT matrix. And gradually you will see filling the matrix from the first ingredients, the first parameters, as reflected in the presentations of Dr. Powell and Dr. Kokarakis. And while you will intervene, the idea and the exercise is to fill the missing links to complete the SWOT matrix when it comes to hydrogen. So I open the floor. So I guess it's wiser to give the floor first to one or two participants joining us physically. I see somebody's raising his hand. Yes.
Good afternoon. I believe that.
Can you please mention your name and your position?
My name is Michael Kedonis. I'm the president of the Hydrogen Association of Cyprus. And I just wanted to address, thank you very much, Professor Karadakis, for your presentation. I just wanted to clarify something in terms of the cost, which was highlighted before. You mentioned that it's $6 to $6.5 per kilogram, the cost that is coming from the green hydrogen. How much is the equivalent of the kilogram to diesel fuel, so that we can have the cost, let's say, converted into diesel or petrol fuel?
Well, as I mentioned, it's a live SWOT analysis exercise. Any intervention in the form of a question, I suggest that our two panelists will take them and respond when they will have a second chance at the end to reflect that. So please, when you intervene, just try to add on the SWOT metrics as well. Yes.
First of all, my name is Chris Christodoulou. I'm a chemical engineer, and my PhD is in metallurgical engineering, material science from Carnegie Mellon University in the United States. To answer Maggie's question, is that you need about 4 times the kilograms of diesel as heat, equivalent heat for hydrogen. Okay, I am fully for hydrogen. I spent my life for hydrogen, producing, storing it, using it. But I want to say that until we make sure that we have the right machines to burn hydrogen, because you need a new design of internal combustion engines to burn the hydrogen, we can use, in this transition, we can use the same ships with the same carbon-based fuels burning machines to enhance their efficiency by using small amounts of hydrogen. So during the transition, I propose that we are ready to increase the existing efficiency of the ships from 5 to 25% to save fuel and also exhaust gases as well. So I want just to introduce this thing.
But you see now the SWOT metrics, we are filling the different parts, but can I have one S from you?
What strength?
Yes.
That we have ready technology to apply for existing ships right now. So okay, the economists probably they can find a way to fit this thing in there. So savings of fuels and emitting less exhaust gases.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Where should we put this?
Our experts in the control room, they will find their way. Don't worry about this. So who's next? Yes.
One is it's available.
So availability already is there, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Any weaknesses? Lack of bunkering infrastructure. Okay.
We don't need infrastructure.
Who's that?
Me.
No need for infrastructure.
If we use a steam reformer process, we don't need any particular infrastructure that is not available right now, because we convert LNG into hydrogen through the use of the steam reformer. So we produce them on board and we burn it immediately. We don't need any particular infrastructure aside of the infrastructure that is already in progress for LNG distribution. which is a major issue in the European Union, and it's already moving a lot. So we can transform LNG into hydrogen on board the ship and burn it immediately without the need for storage on board.
So Nikos, what you are trying to say is that when it comes to hydrogen, we are not going to face this chicken and egg problem that was the case possibly 8-9 years ago when we were dealing more when we have LNG as a flagship fuel. It's not the case.
You can use LNG, for example, at least for the transitional period, to produce hydrogen by with carbon capture on board, pre-combustion carbon capture, and burning or consuming hydrogen immediately after the production phase. So there is no need for storage on board.
Clear.
Yes.
Okay, what you see in your screen now is it reflects the interventions by our two scene setters, your contributions, but also the written comments we are receiving in the control room. And once you see one parameter more focused, highlighted with larger fonts, it means that it was repeatedly, identified by your intervention. So who's next?
May I add something? The lack of bunkering is not necessarily technological, but it can also be regulatory by international organizations like the IMO and other organizations.
Well, being a part of the regulators, this is indeed might be the case, but don't forget, as regulators, we always say that there is a basket of measures. We are fuel technology neutral. But the purpose of this exercise today is to go a step beyond. Of course, we will remain neutral, but at the same time, we have to give some insights and which technology should be prioritized once we will create a fund and where to spend all this money, who goes first, because the optimum objective is to accelerate the take-up of any of the fuel to make shipping greener. So, yes.
I have to disagree with my friend there. To produce blue hydrogen on the board, it's nearly impossible. And since you are going to emit the carbon dioxide, it's better to burn it directly.
My friend, we are talking about carbon capture.
Yes.
Well,
it's nearly impossible to apply that on a ship. It's already very difficult to apply that on the ground.
We have a different opinion. Sorry.
Okay,
I suggest that our two panelists, together with Chris, that will come to the stage later, to take stock of all these questions, even different approaches, and to reflect on their concluding remarks. So, do we have any interventions from those watching us virtually? Okay, then if there is, Dr. Levidis, you want to intervene?
Yes, I would like just to say something as a Dennis advocate. Hydrogen is obviously a very clean fuel, but if everything worked with hydrogen and all electric power is produced by hydrogen, do you feel that there will be some time that we will see trees growing in the Sahara due to a lot of water coming out of this process, and then we will have a different climate problem?
Well, I guess this is an observation. This is not a question addressed to me.
It's one
Yes.
of the threats.
Okay. Threats, yes. Please identify, place this under the T box. Yeah.
Let me say that burning hydrocarbons, we already produce a lot of steam. So we're not going to be producing more by using hydrogen.
Well, it seems that we are turning this live SWOT analysis to a live debate. I'm glad for that. I would like to invite back to the stage and give the floor to our two scene setters, and invite also Chris Angelidis to join us to reflect on what they see already on the screen under the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and to comment also to the to the comments made by our participants. So who wants to go first? Chris?
Well, I think we can see, I like your comment of mother of all fuels, by the way, even though we are here to be fuel agnostic. But certainly we can see a lot of passion and a lot of energy around fuel. I think I take away the fact that we have a clean fuel with the possibility of zero emissions is one of the strongest attractions to this fuel. I also take away the fact that we don't have the infrastructure in place, and that is one of the biggest challenges. But there are opportunities, there are advancements in cell technology. You mentioned generation onboard vessels utilizing seawater, which of course has its own engineering challenges, but those possibly could be overcome. Now, on the threat side, I mean, we see things there that came up in terms of leakage, in terms of production cost, in terms of obviously water scarcity, especially if we think of green. Something I wanted to mention to you or ask you maybe, you said, well, people think the Hindenburg was a hydrogen issue.
Yes.
I think community acceptance concerns is a real threat. What do you think of that?
As always, people are afraid of novelties.
Yeah.
So one of them is hydrogen. Another is nuclear energy, which, by the way, is, if designed in the same way, is probably the cleanest form of energy. So it is understandable, but like I said, hydrogen is probably one of the safe, within quotes, fires. Hydrogen fires are safer than gasoline fires. So justifiably, the public is afraid, but we are here to solve all the problems and make things safer.
Yeah.
If I make some comments, first of all, I do agree with all the bullets in the SWOT matrix. I have no objection to any of them. I like to agree with the colleague who mentioned that we can do production of hydrogen and carbon capture on board. This is a very good idea for the future. It is going to be, to the best of my knowledge, there is going to be a pilot project which will apply the idea. And yes, it is not going to be a need for infrastructure in that case, but we have other modes of transportation described by Professor Powell, like cars. We are going to see cars burning hydrogen rather than electric cars in the near future. And of course, they would need hydrogen stations to refuel. So definitely we would need infrastructure. The equivalence between hydrogen and diesel fuel is a more complex problem, because if we go by the lower calorific value of hydrogen, which has between 120 and 140 megajoules per kilogram, diesel fuel has about 42. So like it was mentioned, it's about a ratio of between 3 and 4 kilograms of diesel to take the same energy like hydrogen. But we have to make the reply more complex, because we need to spend energy to liquefy the hydrogen. There are more aspects to it, so it is not easy. Regarding carbon capture, I believe that it is a technology that will be applied in the future on board vessels.
Thank you. I don't know if Dr. Powell would like to add or to comment on any of the.
Yeah, I think it's a really great conversation. The space for the carbon capture and then storing on board, and so that was difficult in automobiles. More opportunity with shipping, but you can look at just decarbonizing the LNG with renewable natural gas or some of the biofuels we'll be discussing later. So the question is, do we want to be putting on board all carbon, putting on the infrastructure to be doing the capture and storage, which may be a space problem. Really good discussions of water. If you do move to renewable energy, especially on the solar side, you're not requiring any steam in the power cycles. And so therefore you're requiring less water on the front end of the power side, which is an advantage. But if you're water challenged, then that 9 tons per ton can be an issue. Yes,
Many thanks for this. Well, what I would like
the volume of hydrogen versus kilograms on a liter basis, and the global warming potential. So I think if you look at that threat of 10 times higher global warming potential than CO2, basically that would be leaking a lot of hydrogen in order to the emissions at that scale. And because of the value of hydrogen, industry would tighten down on those systems, and therefore I think we can manage the global warming potential just by control of our design and systems engineering. So thank you.
Many thanks for this. Well, allow me first to observe that what we see on the screen reflects basically the discussions, the interventions of the two inserters, plus your interventions. But I would like to mention the following. When we approach this SWOT analysis, it's important not to think as if this fuel is available tomorrow morning. I mean, one of the purpose of this exercise is to give valuable insights to the research community. So think on a time frame of the next decade, and not just that there is a lack of infrastructure tomorrow. Think that whether what we have to do in order to have the infrastructure available in 5 or 10 years' time, because this is all about taking some important information of whether we lack infrastructure. Of course, we all know that, but what we have to take into account to make the framework in order to have the infrastructure available in the medium term. So what you see on your screen, it reflects the hydrogen discussion. And I would like now to, since Dr. Powell is still with us, would like to turn the page to move to the next session and to start discussing the ammonia challenge. So thank you, James.
Thank you.
Dr. Powell, the floor is yours.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Very good discussion there on the hydrogen. And let's talk now about ammonia, which is can be considered as one of the vectors for use of hydrogen. So ammonia is made by reacting hydrogen with nitrogen, present everywhere as the main component of air at 79%. One can easily capture a nitrogen molecule, make ammonia, which can be more readily liquefied for transport and storage, and then either combust the ammonia directly, emitting only water vapor and re-releasing the nitrogen, or decomposing the ammonia first to separate out the hydrogen for direct use at higher efficiency. So let's look at the density on the ammonia side. So ammonia, and again, at looking at these fuels, we have to consider not only the intrinsic density of the fuel itself, but the fuel. So that area in terms of being able to be stored as a liquid, either at ambient pressure and minus 50 degrees C, or semi-refrigerated and at 4 to 8 atmosphere and minus 10 degrees C, or under pressure at about 17 atmospheres with a maximum temperature of about 45 degrees C. So at the end of the day, the tank and equipment minimally impacts the density of stored ammonia, which can be up to twice that of liquid hydrogen, but again, 3 times less than the existing marine fuel oil or diesel. So let's have the next slide, please. Okay. The main concern with ammonia is that it is toxic. And if it released, it can form a lethal gas cloud, as occurred during one of the 10 worst days in Houston's history when an ammonia trailer fell off a freeway overpass and created quite an incident. Ammonia has been considered by some as a potential liquid fuel for passenger cars, but many in the fuels industry believe it is too toxic to be handled by the general public, and that handling and distribution should be done prior. So let's have the next slide, please. Ammonia costs. So green ammonia can be made by electrolysis of water to make the hydrogen using renewable energy, and then follow that with a reaction of nitrogen over a catalyst with the hydrogen using the century-old Haber-Bosch process. Today, the hydrogen can be made from natural gas as blue hydrogen, as we mentioned, with carbon capture storage of the CO2 to deliver fuel at a price that's only about 50% greater than marine fuel oil, considering the conversion to the ammonia. Now, by 2035 and especially 2050, decreases in electrolyzer and renewable power costs will reduce green ammonia prices to a price per unit of energy that's only about twice that of today's marine fuel, and similar to the cost of production of ammonia by blue hydrogen today. So continued development of high temperature solid oxide electrolyzers will enable heat integration of the ammonia synthesis step with water electrolysis to obtain nearly 100% efficiency in electrical power conversion to ammonia and reduce future green ammonia costs. Next slide, please. Looking at where the industry is saying today and assessing where ammonia will play as a marine fuel. Again, this is the International Renewable Energy Association, and they see ammonia as being the dominant marine fuel by 2050, primarily because of the efficiency in production and also the ease of storage relative to hydrogen. So if we go on to the next slide with the SWOT summary. To summarize, ammonia can give zero CO2 emissions at exhaust and reduce pollutants, although NOx formation must be managed by really optimizing emission design and controls. It has a future cost premium that may be 2 times less than efficient than that of current marine fuel oil, stored to handle the longest shipping distances and times required. There is significant infrastructure today, and I didn't get to show the map, but essentially over 100 ports and ships can handle ammonia globally today. And so that aspect is largely proven and demonstrated, but may require some additional engine development and optimization on board. Direct ammonia fuel cells are not yet commercial. On the downside, it is significantly toxic and requires extensive training and protective equipment and engineering systems before it can be used on vessels as fuel. There is some energy loss in converting it back to hydrogen for use in fuel cells, perhaps 10% or less, but that's less than the energy required for liquefaction of hydrogen itself for storage. Its storage density is somewhat better than liquid hydrogen and roughly 20 to 30% of marine fuel cells or marine fuel oil. So many consider ammonia as a prime vector for decarbonization of shipping for these reasons. And with that, I'll stop and turn over the time to Dr. Kokorakis.
Dr. Kokorakis, you address the mother of fuels. So now we're expecting you to give us a name for ammonia as well. Huh?
Now we came to that side.
Okay.
And I believe it's the most favorite side.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister. So let's look at the child. Ammonia production can be gray or brown ammonia, which is produced with significant emissions of greenhouse gases, and can be green, where we obtain ammonia, the components of ammonia, through renewable sources of energy. nitrogen from separation from the air, and the most important part, hydrogen from electrolysis. Let's remember that ship engines, especially the two-stroke engines, they are slow engines, low RPM. So they are very suitable for ammonia, because let's remember that ammonia does not want to burn. So the slower the engine, the easier it is to burn it. The current global needs, as we said in the previous presentation, is about 300 million tons. Today, we produce about 180 million tons of ammonia that are primarily utilized in agriculture for the production of fertilizers. If we take the energy per kilogram of ammonia and diesel oil, heavy fuel oil, we need to increase the production 4 times in order to satisfy the needs of the global fleet. So the production of the green ammonia, of course, given that it is based on renewable sources of energy, more expensive, it could be as high as 2 to 4 times more expensive than the production from fossil fuels. Again, nature also gives the lights. We can have biochemical production from photosynthesis of cyanobacterium Anabena azolai. Again, easier in the laboratory than in real life. We need to have a high scale of production. So the most celebrated, the most common methods, even for green and brown ammonia, is the so-called Haber-Bosch method, which was invented in 1920. I believe the inventors were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. We produce, we get air from the air, we get nitrogen, and from electrolysis of water, we get hydrogen. The two of them are putting together in a reaction that in order to go towards synthesis of ammonia has to be catalyzed with iron or even more exotic catalysts to increase the efficiency of conversion under high pressure and temperature. So inevitably we have emissions of carbon dioxide. Ammonia has also the similar flexibility like hydrogen, but can be burned in internal combustion engines, in steam and gas turbines, and also fuel cells. I would like to point out that contrary to popular belief, ammonia is not a zero carbon fuel because it has very high ignition, autoignition temperature, about around 800 degrees Celsius. So we need pilot fuel. The pilot fuel is like, does the same job like the spark plug makes in our cars. So in discussions I have had with MAN for two-stroke engines and Wärtsilä for four-stroke engines, pilot fuel can be as high as 30%. This is important. So we have different tricks in our sleeves to enhance the combustion. The most common one is to mix ammonia with hydrogen. Hydrogen has very high flame propagation. Mixing, for example, hydrogen with methane can eliminate probably or reduce dramatically methane slip. Similarly, doping ammonia with hydrogen will help the combustion. Unfortunately, due to the explosive nature of hydrogen, it can be used only in spark plug engines so far. We can have a swirl stabilization to enhance the combustion or stratified combustion. It is critical to remember that when it comes to carbon dioxide, the gray ammonia, brown ammonia has a significant amount of greenhouse gases. And we look, as we have to, from well to propeller emissions, not only from tank to propeller. What is not included in this chart, which compares various fuels, the emissions of greenhouse gases from various fuels, is the lethal NOx compound, laughing gas, nitrous oxide, which has its 300 more higher green warming potential than carbon dioxide, compared to carbon dioxide. So what we need to do, although the temperature of combustion of ammonia is relatively low because of its high latent heat of vaporization, we have NOxes because of nitrogen is part of ammonia. So we need to abate them. We need to utilize abatement means, like for example, a common one is select catalytic reactor, where urea reacts with exhaust gases and produces harmless nitrogen and water. And you see here schematically the reactions. Unfortunately, part of them is laughing gas. It needs to be, it's a matter of research. I have to confess to you that as of today, there is no in the market ammonia engine. It is under study by the major engine makers. They have estimates for 2024 for the first engines to be in the shipyards. Probably later we will see, because sometimes unexpected things happen. So key design aspects for ammonia vessels, and let's not forget that ammonia today is transported, how? With the LPG carriers. I need to tell you that ammonia is thermodynamic cousins with LPG. Propane has a very close boiling point temperature with ammonia. So we need to prevent leakages because of its toxicity. It's lethal, very few quantities, between 20 and 30 ppm will, and depending of course on the time of exposure. We need to detect it, manage the vapors. There are various ways. Control ammonia discharge to the fish, to the sea, because we're not going to have fish for our food. The material of the engine has to be, including the elastomerics, has to be properly selected. Containment system is important. And of course, the engine and fuel supply system. Here you see how we can neutralize ammonia either by solution in water or reacting, neutralizing ammonia as an alcohol, neutralizing with an acid. And here you see the basic components of a fuel supply system. We start from LPG, and on the basis of LPG, we design the system for ammonia, where we inject the ammonia as a liquid. Keep in mind that inside the engine room, we have double wall pipes, which increase the cost. But why to use ammonia? This is going to be, those are the strengths which are going to be discussed in the SWOT matrix. So the main idea is that ammonia has significant reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Besides, even though we have pilot fuels, is mildly cryogenic compared to LNG, for example, and storage compared to hydrogen is easier. And why not to use? Again, those are the weaknesses. High solubility in water complicates where we put the detectors of ammonia. We have crystalline corrosion. We cannot utilize high nickel strength steels, no more than 4%. So we are going to see all those in the SWOT matrices. But we have a lot of experience in handling and transporting ammonia, which is a big advantage. So you see again the effect of scaling as the we proceed and solve technological problems, we are going to have the economy of scale, the reduction of price, and the future of the fuel is, of course, going to overpass various stumbling blocks, but eventually we believe that ammonia is going to be one of the fuels of the future, probably the king, and is going to be the hydrogen, and the ammonia will be the queen of the future multi-fuel society. Thank you.
From my interactions and brainstorming with the industry, I got the impression that the child is more appropriate for longer routes and possibly the mother for shorter routes. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's important also to reflect in this SWOT analysis which fuel technology is more appropriate from which segment or type of ships, and whether it's more appropriate for longer or shorter routes. So please again scan your code or intervene to start filling the SWOT matrix with us. So the floor is yours. So can I see anybody with attending physically asking for the floor? Yes.
One of the main challenges that the industry is facing is to attract new professionals. And I don't know if it will be wise to add more complexity by introducing new fuels that not exactly are not safe, but definitely they are they are more risky than the conventional ones or other type of new fuels. So what I will suggest is just to consider that one of the main elements that we need to take into account is the human element.
Well, I think you raise an important parameter. It's the human element, the upskilling of the existing workforce, because it's going to be another challenge, not just to develop the technology, but to have the human element that could accommodate and support it. Yes, this is indeed very true, and we have to consider that in parallel of all the other elements. Yes, Nicholas.
I have been very positive against hydrogen. Unfortunately, now I have to be pessimistic about ammonia. Ammonia is, first point, it's not a fuel, it's a chemical substance. Ammonia has been used during the First World War as a chemical weapon. It's very toxic, it's very dangerous for human life, and a few drops in the engine room can cause death. And I have not seen in my life, I have been in hundreds of ships, I have not seen a single ship without any sort of leakage, fuel leakage, lube oil leakage, or water leakage. So ammonia is going to be very difficult to handle. Another issue is the storage, large-scale storage of ammonia. As it was mentioned before by Dr. Kokarakis, it is right now, it is used mainly for the agricultural industry. And it is not right now widely available, or there is enough production to cover the shipping industry. So if we want to see large-scale storage of ammonia, I don't know where we shall put this, given the dangers that are connected with the storage of ammonia. We certainly not going to have it within the city, and we have, unfortunately, very bad experiences in Cyprus with also similar events. And also, we need to consider the terrorism issue when we're going to have a large-scale storage of ammonia next or near the cities or near the port infrastructure.
Well, I take it, Nicholas, that you are quite negative when it comes to ammonia. So no opportunities, no strengths for this.
Well, I don't want to be, I don't want to null ammonia, but we need to do a real brainstorming, and we need to also consider the dangers that are connected with ammonia. Okay. And
Yes.
I believe that ammonia has the potential to be used in the shipping industry. One of the major reasons is because it's a liquid and you can store it nicely, easier than the LNG, let's say. Now, I think the difficult things about using ammonia is to find a way to scrap the NOxes that you are producing, and also any leakages, but leakages is for every fuel, isn't it? We can find the ways to overcome these safety problems. So I believe that ammonia is a good fuel that we have to consider for the future.
Thank you. Do we have anybody attending virtually that would like to intervene? I can hear you very clearly, but I take it that this is a no or a yes. Well, we have in any case a participant would like to intervene attending physically. Yes.
One thing that I would like to add is another thing is that it takes, or it took almost 20 years to develop the technology for the use of and the supply chain for the use of LNG. And with regards to the with the new fuels, we also need to consider that the deadlines are approaching. So we have certain targets to meet. So I don't know if we have the time actually to spend on a fuel. That definitely it will be time consuming to tackle all the challenges rather than to focus on another type that will give us a solution earlier.
Well, this is exactly the reason we are doing this exercise, just to signal some useful, conclusions to how we are going to formulate a global of maritime fund, how to prioritize certain technologies, where to invest the research funds accordingly, but also try in your interventions to consider the economic side of it, because shipping is also about optimizing routes, is about maximizing profits, is the cargo capacity on board. So try also to see these alternative fuel technologies in that perspective. Not only, of course, safety risk is very important, but it's also the element of being maximizing the efficiency for a shipping company, because this is also a part of the decision, investment decision that a shipper has to take in the near future. So, Alexander, you'd like to intervene? Yes.
Minister, yes, I was just going to say that ammonia seems to be at this moment have an advantage in terms of its usage, in terms of gaining experiences, because we have green corridors right now which are focusing on ammonia as a fuel. So I think that will give us a lot of experiences well ahead of any other fuel, not methanol, but certainly hydrogen, and that will place it in an advantageous position, I think, as a leading fuel for the future. And as an industry, we do want to see a fuel that is going to dominate, of course, and the rest of the fuels to be used where appropriate in terms of the trade of the ship. But I think the use of green corridors and the use of ammonia is going to give it quite a leading advantage in terms of being a fuel, the fuel of the future, as the experts that Irina also predict as well.
Well, let's keep this observation by Alexis, and I will ask our panelists to come on stage and comment on that, because what Alexander just said, it gives useful insights. Let's say tomorrow we are recruited in this R&I fund to prioritize things. So is Alexander's statement valid, which, let's say, ammonia has a priority when it comes to research development compared, let's say, to the mother, hydrogen? So, Dr. Kogarakis, the floor is yours.
Alexandros probably meant Australia to Japan green corridor, which emphasizes on ammonia fuels. And what is a green corridor? Is a union of stakeholders that they are along two or more trade routes or ports, and utilizing low carbon fuels. And of course, they will help for the proliferation of ammonia. But at the same time, there is the counter argument. MIR in Copenhagen was prohibited of doing tests of ammonia engine because close to their laboratories, there was a school. So they stopped the test, the program goes back. The estimation is that we're going to have 2035, that's going to be kind of a mature date for ammonia. But a very important point that I forgot to mention in my presentation is that if we had everything solved and we wanted to burn ammonia today as a fuel, we could not do it. Why? Because utilization of toxic fuels is prevented by the International Gas Code. IGC prevents toxic fuels. So unless we change the regulation, we cannot burn ammonia. Detection of ammonia is critical because ammonia is lighter than air. It's going to go up. So you put the detectors up in the top, under deck. No, because if ammonia mixes with water, higher solubility in water, it goes down, becomes heavier than air. So we have to put upstairs and downstairs. And that's it. Those are my observations. And I do agree with the comments in the
Yeah, I mean, the comments, I think, reflect, well, what we heard from you and from Joe, and of course, what we got online. I mean, I take the toxicity as a main threat. I take on the strengths, the establishment of the transport and storage infrastructure. Joe, I don't know if you're still on this, either one of you can take this question, because this is one of the questions that came from online. You know, we talked about the transportation and storage and the need to scale that. But the question specifically was, what about scaling bunkering infrastructure? And that goes in line with handling a toxic material. So where do you see the bunkering infrastructure challenges go? Is that something that can be overcome?
Should I answer or we give the
Joe, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. I would mention that there's about 300 green or blue hydrogen projects in the world today announced, and most of them are using ammonia as a vector. So I think that there's an ability to synergize with that hydrogen vector via ammonia opportunity, and quite a number of projects already underway looking at storage and distribution at a much larger scale than what we have today. And so I think there's an opportunity to do that. That'll be moved by shipping, and then the shipping bunkering can certainly be playing as an offset of that. And I would like to mention that you can also crack or reform ammonia back into nitrogen and hydrogen, re-release the nitrogen to the air, and then use the hydrogen either in a fuel cell for an electric drive or in a turbine for a electric drive. And so you don't necessarily need to use the hydrocarbon fuel with the ammonia in some of the drivetrains that are imagined.
Anything to add?
Yeah, the bunkering issue has been studied extensively by my company, the French Classification Society, Bureau Veritas. We have related rules on that aspect. We have studied the dispersion of leaking ammonia, because under atmospheric pressure and ambient temperatures, ammonia is a gas. So applying the gas dynamics principles, we can predict where ammonia is going to go. So, and dissolve the ammonia in curtains of water. So we are engineers. The word impossible is not in our dictionary. We are going to find solutions.
Well, we have another 2 minutes. Any comment from the audience?
Not on ammonia. ammonia on the other fuels, could I make an intervention?
On ammonia.
No, on hydrogen, but if.
Well, but now we're trying to finalize
All right.
the ammonia SWOT matrix. So
Right, just a question from my side. Let's say, considering the very slow flame speed of ammonia, will this lead into a low energy efficiency internal combustion engine unavoidably when we try to burn it? And this also will lead to risking the economic competitiveness of using ammonia on board. Is that correct? Is that the case?
As they say in the United States, there are no free lunches. So you gain something, you're right. You're absolutely right. The feasibility, we have done feasibility studies for our clients on the techno-economic aspect of it. And came out that although ammonia is very attractive for greenhouse gases, it actually kills you when it comes to the money. Yes, it's more expensive. And our hope is to mature technology. I don't have my cell phone with me, but remember how it was 10 years ago? We hope the same thing will happen with ammonia.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Paolo, final remark, intervention from your side?
Well, again, good discussion today. I agree with the issue and the engine optimization and design, and the low flame speed can be an issue with the ammonia. But again, consider cracking it back to hydrogen and then using electric drivetrains via fuel cell as an alternative.
Many thanks for your contribution, for your valuable insights. And of course, we will be in touch in the forthcoming days to draw more detailed conclusions. Turning to you, Chris, any final observations?
Oh, I think what we captured there, and more stuff is still coming in from online. Obviously, the toxicity, a major concern, the cost issues, something we didn't touch a lot, but we did capture it in the SWOT. Corrosion causes stress, corrosion cracking, that's something to be considered on the engineering side. The need for SCR catalyst because of the NOx formation, another one of the weaknesses. Again, technologies are there to overcome. It's just a matter of how do you optimize these weaknesses with the scaling up of the use of this fuel, and how do you balance that out?
And final word from you, Dr. Kokarakis.
Again, I will close with the idea that there are always solutions. We have the NOx compounds and the select catalytic reactors. We have the laughing gas, but we also have carbene scrubbers. We have special scrubbers that can withhold the laughing gas, the lethal laughing gas. So there are always solutions, and we're working on it. We are at the teething stage. We hope to finish it one day.
Well, many thanks. We have now reached to a close on ammonia, and it's a time for a short break, around 8 to 10 minutes. Stay tuned. You will have the opportunity during the break to watch a short video on the strategic vision of Cyprus shipping, and you will understand why through that vision we are doing this exercise today, because one of our pillars is, of course, extrovertness, and it's all about collecting intelligence. Thank you very much. So welcome back to the second part of our SWOT analysis hybrid event. We have covered already hydrogen and ammonia, and many of you consider that the second part is going to be boring, that what is important is mainly to consider hydrogen and ammonia. On the contrary, I must say, because we should not forget that we are already in this difficult transitional decarbonization path. And of course, biofuels could be the solution in the short and medium term. And that's why you've seen also in the EU a number of proposals, part of the Fit for 55, to accelerate and incentivize the supply and, of course, the demand of the use of biofuels. So we are glad to have with us today Dr. Howard from the University of Houston for his intervention and to provide feedback to enlighten us on the use of biofuels in the maritime sector. Dr. Howard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister. I am very honored to be part of this panel and this discussion and analysis of a very important topic of fuels for maritime. I am a professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at the University of Houston. My expertise is in chemical reaction engineering and catalysis. I'm also principal investigator of a laboratory here called the Texas Center for Clean Engines, Emissions, and Fuels. So we go from arguably two very simple molecules to a very complex portfolio of fuels called biofuels. Now, this slide provides a landscape showing the many different types of biofuels spanning first, second, third, and fourth generation. Liquid biofuels used for marine applications are primarily biodiesel formed by esterifying oils such as palm oil or soybean oil with methanol, giving so-called FAME, fatty acid methyl esters. Or another form is renewable diesel produced by hydrogenating the oil, which removes most of the oxygenated compounds, which cause problems in storage and use in conventional engines. These are so-called first generation biofuels, as the feedstock is also a food source, the classic one being bioethanol used in gasoline mixes. Production and availability is limited via the land required, which is high for first generation biofuels, where only a portion of the plant, in this case, the oil extracted from seeds for biodiesel, is used. Advanced or second generation biofuels can be produced from non-edible biomass, including wood chips, corn stover, sugarcane, bagasse, and so on, and can use more or even all of the growing plant and therefore have much higher yields per unit area of land. These are much more expensive to produce, however, requiring complex processes such as catalytic liquefaction or gasification to form the liquid molecules desired for combustion. And therefore, they have little market penetration to date. Third and fourth generation biofuels seek to overcome some of the disadvantages of first and second generation, propose, for example, to use algae and or microorganisms either directly or genetically engineered, but these are still very early in the research phase. While estimates vary widely, the ultimate potential of bioenergy has an average estimate of about 100 exajoules per year, or 15% of total global energy demand in the year 2030. Bioenergy utilization for marine applications is limited by practical land use constraints, cost of production from low density feedstocks, and competition for use in other decarbonization markets. Next slide, please. Liquid biofuels, especially the hydrogenated vegetable oils, sometimes called renewable diesel, which removes most of the oxygen in the final fuel, can indeed be drop-in fuels for replacing marine fuel oil, having similar high energy density up there in the regime where gasoline and conventional diesel reside. This is clear advantage relative to other fuels proposed for decarbonization of shipping or marine applications. These can be stored and distributed at ambient pressure and temperature as marine fuel oil is today. So that's a noted advantage to especially hydrogenated vegetable oils. Next slide, please. Now, carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas reduction relative to today's fossil-derived marine fuel oil can vary depending upon how and where the bio or renewable oil is produced. Changes in existing land to cultivate new palm or soybean oil crops can release large amounts of CO2 from soils, obviously a disadvantage. If locations are poorly chosen, CO2 emissions from land use change can offset all of the CO2 reduction value of the oil and negatively impact wildlife habitats, as happened in recent decades with some of the fuels derived from palm oil production in Southeast Asia. Energy is required to cultivate, harvest, and then transport the low energy density biomaterials to a central processing plant, press and extract those oils, produce and then hydrogen or methanol to react with the oil to form bio or renewable diesel. Recent studies by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, here in the US, indicate an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions can be obtained by use of bio or renewable diesel. Similar results were obtained by a group at Argonne National Labs, which maintains the GREET model, G-R-E-E-T, for CO2 impact of transportation fuels. Advanced biofuels are also highly dependent on exact pathway for production. Gasification and conversion of bio waste can have greater than a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, depending upon the energy used in processing. Next slide, please. Now, given the need to collect and process low density biomass and the energy required for conversion and refining, biofuels are 2 to 5 times more expensive than conventional marine fuel oil. These are mature technologies, and costs for first and second generation biofuels are therefore not likely to improve significantly, given the massive R&D global expenditure over the last 2 decades. So the Shell Deloitte survey shown on the next slide that Joe Powell showed earlier had only 10% of respondents believing biofuels will be substantial pathway for decarbonizing shipping fuels. If we could go to 2 slides ahead, please. Okay, here we go. Similar numbers are projected by IRENA. Technology to produce biofuels is available today and can comprise 10% of fuel if decarbonization incentives come into play for marine applications. Further growth is not expected, however, due to the limited availabilities and, as I mentioned, the high cost. Available biofuel is more likely to be deployed in aviation, which can provide higher costs than shipping or marine applications, which have traditionally used the lower cost fuels. Next slide, please. So we move to SWOT, and this slide summarizes some of the key points of biofuel SWOT. Biofuels for marine applications are intriguing because the best of them potentially allow drop-in replacement of a high energy density, easy to store liquid fuel equivalent to today's marine fuel oil. As indicated in the NREL studies, they are hydrocarbons, and when combusted continue to generate some particulate matter, but these are reduced by more than 50% relative to petroleum-derived fuel oils. Sulfur emissions in the form of SOx are virtually eliminated with biofuels, while slip of uncombusted hydrocarbon fuel is typically higher, which marginally increases smog. Like life-cycle nitrous oxide, N2O, or NOx emissions are less at the tailpipe of the ship engine, but higher overall due to agricultural production processes for first generation biofuels notably. The principal disadvantages are, as I mentioned, high costs, which are difficult to bear in marine fuel segments, market segments, and would require a very high carbon tax or penalty for an offset. First generation biofuels are of limited supply and compete with food production, requiring larger amounts. And finally, I'll be happy to engage in discussion as we move forward in this segment of the SWOT. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks for this insightful contribution for biofuels. And I would like now to welcome on stage Professor Lyridis to enlighten us with his valuable knowledge on biofuels, and to ensure him that the biofuels, it might be much more important and interesting than hydrogen or methanol at this stage. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank also on my behalf PwC and of course the Minister and the Deputy Minister for hosting this event on board this exciting place. I will not spend any more of your time, so let's start. I will not go as back as Jules Verne earlier, but already in 1900s, Rudolf Diesel predicted that we will use palm oil in today's engines. I don't know how true this is. We have to see. I think more or less the previous speaker has already mentioned the ways that these are produced. We will have to focus on the first 3 or 4 generations of biofuels. Essentially, 3 kinds of fuels are of interest in shipping. It's straight vegetable oil, hydrated vegetable oils, and FAME, fatty acid methyl ester. The first one is almost has to be dismissed by definition because it's made out of, it's the first generation, it's not useful, but HVO and FAME are considered very much as marine fuels. They are produced in different ways. I do not want to go into the details how they are produced, but this is some of the ways. You can see them here, and they are for your reference. They will be later. These are all produced, collected in the frame of one of the European Union funded projects on biofuels. So biofuels, the ways to produce mainly is from solid biogenic residues, agricultural and forest residues. The first one is has low competing uses, so we tend to forget that, especially in the EU, the production is from agricultural residues and forest residues. You will see here in this graph how it is projected in terms of energy content in the next few years, and in terms of price per liter in 2019 euros, how we project the different fuels. I think the most appropriate would be from forest residues, but we can see also residues from biomass, etc. Overall, and I would like to focus on this slide, overall, the biomass origin energy for biofuels can be considered carbon neutral, but this calculates the carbon emitted from the time they are produced to the time they are burnt in the ship. They offer an alternative, a zero emission alternative for vessels, and this is what everybody feels. Especially HVO and FAME, the 2 most important biofuels, have been tested in blending with other fossil fuels up to 100%, and there were tests actually. The first test was in 2018 with a heavy fuel oil, 100% equivalent biofuel, and the results were very promising. Although, to be honest, the fuel used was not compliant with ISO standard 8217, which is the standard for marine fuels. The share of biofuel market is rapidly increasing, and this is important because this knowledge is also spreading among also engine manufacturers. So this makes the admission of biofuels more acceptable. Now, if we focus on this slide, and I will leave this for you to contemplate as long as I am discussing the pros and cons a little bit, you will see here the comparison for the impact of cost of biofuel on a, this is done by Lloyd's Register some time ago, in 2017. And it is the impact on profitability of a 9,000 TEU container vessel that uses heavy fuel oil and scrubber. So we see what would happen if we used electric propulsion, or if we used the hybrid hydrogen and fuel cells, hydrogen internal combustion engine, ammonia and fuel cells, ammonia internal combustion engine, and biofuel. The yellow part is the extra capital needed for the machinery. The orange part is the extra fuel cost. The blue is the extra capital energy storage, and the gray one is the capacity of the cargo lost. You will see that the impact of biofuel on this engine is the least of all the biofuels. So total cost of ownership is lower if we used biofuels. There is no capacity lost almost. There is little requirement for energy storage because the calorific value is similar to fossil fuels. The only extra, and the machinery is also already adapted for use with biofuels. The only extra cost is essentially the cost of producing the biofuel, but overall as total cost of ownership, it is almost lower than any other of the fuels shown here. There are certain strengths for using biofuel. Of course, they can be found everywhere. They can be produced everywhere. Some are derived by waste, so this gives a circularity, and it's also a product by other industries that can be used as a feedstock for biofuel. Some types are already available as a fuel at competitive pricing. They are most of them compatible with existing marine engines and bunkering infrastructure, low retrofit cost, as we can see here, and almost no capex, especially for HVO. The additional capex is zero. For FAME, it's considered to be around 5%, and a similar cost comparison for liquefied biogas and liquefied natural gas. So they have a similar cost. OPEX is comparable to heavy fuel oil and marine gas oil, unless somebody takes into account that we will use additional training. There are also a lot of weaknesses for using biofuel. For example, it's more expensive than fossil fuels. They're comparable to fossil fuels. There is a lack of global infrastructure. There is an immature market for the time being. There is insufficient supply, and this is one of the major drawbacks. They have poor cold flow properties. Sometimes there's clogging. There tends to be microorganism growth. It is corrosive. It is solvent. It has a solvent effect. There is a rubber degradation where it's used. CO2 reduction is mainly from the use of the biofuel on its total life cycle, but on board the vessel, they produce similar CO2 with existing fossil fuels. There might be a slight increase in NOx because of the increased oxygen presence. And they have, one of the major weaknesses is the regulatory issue that for the time being, the ISO 8217 has not been updated. We expect a new update in 2022, but it hasn't been issued yet. In all, it cannot be a fuel of choice for marine use. It can be only as a drop-in fuel. Of course, there are opportunities in terms of incentives from the industry to use it, in terms of research funded. Mainly when it's more mainstream, it will also become more available. There are threats that have to be considered. Only very few vessels for the time being use it, only 1% of the total fleet. I found 46 vessels in the Clarkson's database, 80 on order. And of course, it may make obsolete, not obsolete, it may hurt the engine manufacturer warranty if somebody blends fuel. So there are quite a few problems with using biofuels, and I would like to discuss them further during the next session.
Professor Levins, many thanks for this constructive contribution. So it's time to turn to our audience now to scan the QR code or to intervene either physically or virtually and make a comment, contribute to the filling of the SWOT matrix. So any intervention from our audience attending physically? Mr. Kokkarakis.
Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate both presenters for consolidating a very complex subject. By complex, I mean many different kinds of biofuels, biomethane, bioethane, biodiesel. So they managed to put everything together in a nice form. I would like to make some people happy today, especially the ones in the shipping companies that face compliance with CII, XI, and so on and so on. When they burn biofuels, in the session working group at IMO, they consider that when we have a blend of biofuels up to 30%, regulation 18.3.1 of Marpol Annex 6, we can consider the emissions from tank to wake equal to 0. It doesn't mean that we don't have carbon dioxide, but this is accounted for in the agricultural AFOLOU database. So we can take it equal to 0. So if I have a blend of 30% biofuel, biogenic fuel with 70% HFO, the emission factor that I can use is 0.7 times 3.11, a 30% reduction. With the agreement of the engine maker, you can have even higher blends, but 30% is the limit that definitely we do not have increase of NOx. So it's a big opportunity, in my opinion. Biofuels are easy to can create many jobs, especially in areas where they can produce in rural areas. So this is also an opportunity. A threat is that aviation and other sectors are going to steal them from shipping. So availability, the high cost, but remember that from wells to tank, the emission factor will be negative, more or less, because they remove carbon dioxide anywhere from X% to 100%. So it is a big opportunity, and we have no need to change the machinery to burn biofuels. This is a step.
Any other intervention from the audience? Well, yes.
I would like to point out also another major biofuel, which is, I think, so not addressed in depth during the presentation. Renewable natural gas is probably the only one that can achieve a carbon negative emission footprint, meaning that we reduce carbon dioxide from the environment by burning renewable natural gas. And of course, renewable natural gas can be produced locally in any country and can be produced on scale. We can see today some very brilliant examples of using renewable natural gas and contributing to the circular economy of each and every country that produces natural gas, either by anaerobic digestion or by using any other technology. So renewable natural gas is another biofuel that can be a contributor to the decarbonization challenge.
Okay. Other interventions?
Just to note that depending on the country, like Cyprus, I don't think that in Cyprus you can produce much of biodiesel, biofuel, because we don't have oil, we don't have palm oil or vegetable. We have olive oil, but we're not going to convert olive oil into biodiesel.
Okay, let's now receive a question, a comment, or contribution online. Hello, good afternoon. Sorry. Okay, so let me make two observations to the audience, but also to our synthesis. We mentioned retrofitting. So I would like to see where we place the retrofitting element in this SWOT analysis. And the second one is, let's for a minute leave aside us, the regulators. We don't exist. And let's say we have never committed on the non-fossil fuels. And let's say that the future is only biofuels. So what do we do with the carbon capture? Let's say this is the only solution. So how we envisage to respond to the carbon capture element? So this is something to have in mind when approaching the SWOT analysis, because if we isolate biofuels, especially for the short and medium term, we need to consider the carbon capture element if this is the only solution. So please comment on this, and then I will invite our scene setters when they are back on stage to make their comments on these two observations. Yes.
Well, regarding the carbon capture, I believe that it is quite important to improve carbon capture technologies. I do not believe that we can apply carbon capture on board in case we store on board, because you burn 1 kilogram of fuel and you produce 3+ kilograms of CO2. So then you have problems with the storage and the payload of the vessel. But I believe that carbon capture could improve in land applications, could improve the negativity of the solution. As Dr. Kokarakis said, yes, biofuels, gaseous biofuels, liquid biofuels have a lot of advantages, and because of the similarity of physical and chemical characteristics. And of course, we have the way to store and the way to transport. But at the end of the day, I believe that if we improve this carbon capture for land-based applications, we will have a great advantage.
Many things.
I pretty much agree with the gentleman there. Let me say that carbon dioxide is probably the most stable molecule in the earth. It's very difficult to break it and make it something useful. Only the trees can do that through chlorophyll to convert it into fruits and oxygen. So only nature can do that. Also, carbon dioxide is a gas. So you produce carbon dioxide with other things like other junk or steam or NOxes. It's very difficult to separate the carbon dioxide and capture it. So what are we going to do? To store it as a compressed gas on board, and then how much of this you are going to store? Maybe you have to burn other fuel to go and put it underground, for example. But each country, they don't have underground, let's say, gas fields that they're empty now and you can pump them in there, which is not also something easy. So carbon dioxide capturing, it's a really very difficult thing. I mean, we can talk about that as a brilliant idea. Maybe in Houston they can apply it because they have a lot of gas field abandoned, so they can do that. But we cannot apply it in Cyprus, for example. So the location is also something that we have to consider all the time. And again, once you store it on the ship, where you are going to dispose it?
I see Dr. Kokarakis.
The question comes to me.
Well, let me give the floor first to Mr. Stradiou and then to Dr. Kokarakis to comment on this or to contribute. Yes.
Thank you, Minister. For the time being, it seems that the most realistic alternative solution is biofuel, because it's a technology already here. We use it in our cars, but there are some questions that we have to respond. Production. Are we, let's say, are we going to replace all the growth, appropriate plants that we can produce biofuel? And then how can we feed the 8 billion population of them? So there are some other questions. However, for the next 20, 30 years, we can use biofuel in order to achieve, let's say, the Fit for 55 targets and so on. And if you allow me, I would also like to comment on carbon capture, etc. This is a discussion that is going to be, let's say, we have a discussions at IMO at international level starting for next MEPC Of course, there are questions as where to store it, how storage capacity we need on ships, and where to deliver it, because obviously we need reception facilities in ports. I'm not sure that realistically speaking, that there are such facilities now. So thank you, the Minister, for
Valid points by Yannis. Dr. Kokkarakis, your floor is yours. I know.
As we say, house without a Yanni cannot float. At the risk, allow me to make a forecast, although sometimes is at the risk of humiliating the forecasters. There are technologies that are studied, which will make carbon capture, hopefully will make it possible. There is the so-called low frequency waves, which requires about 10 times lower energy to make the molecules of water, what I call super molecules, and neutralize not only the carbonic route, the carbon dioxide, but also the sulfuric route. And unfortunately, because I consider the carbon dioxide a commodity, and we needed to make this synthetic and electric fuels, unfortunately, in this technology, this is going to be thrown away. But we don't have a storage problem, and we can remove. And as a piece of information, a piece of news, a major shipping company in Greece is going to embark into a pilot fuel to verify this type of technology in the near future.
Thanks.
There is no one solution that fits all, and that goes also for the carbon capture. Biofuels' biggest advantage is that, as mentioned by the previous speakers and presenters, that it can be used. They can be used on existing engines without any modifications. Upscaling is certainly a challenge. It can be a solution in the short to the medium term. It can help the owners to reduce the cost of compliance. There is a strong appetite by the owners to start using biofuels. However, the regulatory framework is not yet in place. Although we are allowed to use biofuels in cars, we cannot use them on the ships. And the last thing is that we can incentivize the owners the same way as they do in Netherlands, that they cover the part of the cost. Definitely, biofuels will be more costly than the conventional fuels. So if the states can help to cover part of the cost, that would facilitate the change. Thank you.
Yes.
One comment from my side. We heard from the previous speakers all the positive advantages for the use of biofuels, but I think a critical thing is the availability of feedstocks. And when we are talking about FAME or HVO coming from, let's say, UCO, used cooking oil, and taking into account the Fit for 55, the very ambitious targets that the European Union has put for automotive and for aviation. So, and again, taking into account that HVO is used as SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. So we see that there is going to be a big competition between use of HVO in automotive and aviation compared to marine fuel bunkering. And also a last factor is the very high price. Recently, HVO was close to $2,500 per ton compared to heavy high sulfur fuel oil or low sulfur fuel oil. There's a big gap for the ship owners. So all these, I think, are massive challenges that, in my view, overcome the advantages for the use of biofuels in the shipping industry.
Thanks. Allow me to make another observation while I invite Chris, Dimitrios, and Dr. Harold back to the stage to discuss. Well, we have placed under the weaknesses box, of course, the regulatory challenges. Indeed, there is a challenge there. And you all very rightly mentioned the Fit for 55, the targets that we all are committed to address and to comply. But at the same time, don't forget Fit for 55 is a regulatory package. So what I would like also to ask is under the Fit for 55, we have 2-3 regulatory pieces that are very much related to biofuels. Is the FuelEU Maritime, the the Renewable Energy Directive, which on the one hand we are planning the fact that we envisage to incentivize the production and supply, and then to force the shipping industry to comply. So do you believe that this framework is effective to address the regulatory challenges? The floor is yours, Professor.
Yes, it's also the Energy Taxation Directive that gives the member states some slack in deciding a few things. In terms of the Fit for 55, biofuels, of course, are very much welcome because overall their life cycle, they have carbon neutral or carbon negative, maybe depending on the supply chain. We have to say here that we have to be very careful about the transparency of the supply chain, because there is also a source of fraud there. We don't know how they are produced, but there should be carbon neutral overall. The problem is with the EU ETS system. The EU ETS only measures the emissions from tank to wake and will give you will surrender no allowances for using biofuels, because they are considered the same as fossil fuels, especially if they are the blending is very low. One other important issue I think that we haven't specifically stressed is the ethical issues of using biofuel, because it will remove some of the supply it's competing with the food industry. So this is also very important.
Yeah.
Chris.
Well, I mean, I'll start with that. And indeed, we captured that as a thread. And I'll tell you that online the discussion is pretty robust. And as Philippus mentioned at the very onset of this, there is an ESG component in this. And of course, we are very interested in ESG issues. So I think the competition with food supply, the limited availability of the feedstock is certainly something that has to be addressed with the biofuels. I do take as a plus, and I think it was captured as an opportunity, that second, third, fourth generation biofuels really are showing advances, and also using sort of the entire plant, including the non-edible parts, and so that removes some of the challenges. You know, the fact that it's a drop-in fuel is a strength.
And it's also an opportunity because it can be used as pilot fuel for some of the electric or the synthetic fuels.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I will tell you from the US and from the experience that I have, just the fact that you don't have enough renewable diesel is where the core of the issue exists. And then you have, when it comes to shipping, you have competition from aviation industry and the automotive industry. So there are a number of challenges here.
Let's hear from Dr. Howell then.
Yeah, a lot of great discussion. I wanted to add that biodiesel in its current generation actually has been shown to be a cleaner fuel than petroleum diesel from the standpoint of particulate formation, and depending on the source of the oil, can have lower NOx. So in the short term, that's an advantage. And then connecting hydrogen, green hydrogen to HVO, if we view hydrogen coming from water eventually, that part of the biodiesel would be renewable. One of the disadvantages currently is that methanol and then hydrogen obviously come from gray processes. So I think biofuels needs to evolve, and with time is one of the elements of the portfolio of solutions for maritime, I believe. Thanks for the great discussion.
For a minute that we were hired tomorrow morning to structure the new fund and to allocate the money for research. So how much, what percentage on this fund should go for biofuels? and till which date? Because, I mean, gradually we have to phase out biofuels and introduce hydrogen and methanol. So if you have tomorrow morning $10 billion as a fund, which percentage of this money you will allocate and you mandate the research environment and the researchers to go for biofuels?
Well, heavy fuel oil and FAME are almost technology readiness level of 10, so which is almost most of the things we know about them. Regarding the most advanced, then that are like third and fourth generation, are the level of 4 to 5. There we do need research, and there we need to do it. I can easily make a forecast that it's 20 years because I'm not going to be here in 20 years and prove myself wrong.
Yeah.
But I think as a transitional fuel, it can be very helpful. We cannot depend on it. It's a drop-in fuel. It can be blended with other fuels, but we cannot depend on decarbonizing the shipping industry using biofuels. That's my personal opinion, of course.
Okay, clear. Chris?
Yeah, I think the bulk of your fund probably will go elsewhere. There are areas here to continue researching the new generation fuels. There are areas with addressing sort of the biofuels along with the food supply, along with the ethical use of land. But I think, as you said, it's fairly mature. And so a lot of the issues have to do with usage. Now, there is research to be done on carbon capture and that combination and the fact that you can result in negative emissions. But yeah, I think that's where I would take it.
Carbon capture is also necessary for other fuels as well, not only for biofuels.
Absolutely. Carbon capture linked with hydrogen is, of course,
this is one area that needs to be addressed anyway.
So I guess we have reached the end of this exercise, the SWOT analysis on biofuels, unless there is a final comment from the audience. Yes, the First Lady intervening. Voila.
Let me say something about, I listened to this discussion, but I would like to note that according to the new energy package, and of course, the new targets for greenhouse gas emission, European Commission promote the production of advanced biofuels or biofuels that produce from raw materials that are waste. So there is a lot of limitation regarding raw materials that are food or feed crops. So I have listened a lot of consideration about biofuel that now I think that the European Commission try to regulate. So in my opinion, the competition will be between transport, aviation, and maritime sector, between biofuels. I think the competition between production of biofuel and food and feed is a very limited for the next years. And of course, European Commission promote the production of biofuel from waste because this is a way to manage the waste. But the problem is that at the moment, it is not easy to produce biofuels that are near fossil fuel, I mean near diesel. And this is the problem. At the moment, we have FAME, HVO, but at the same time, there is a lot of research for the production of biofuels from raw materials like municipal waste. It's a different structure of waste is not one kind of waste, and the research is focused on this, how to produce biofuel from waste that is not one kind, like UCO. UCO is one kind of biofuel, but from different waste that is a fraction of different.
Well,
kind
yes,
of
well, this is very clear, and thank you for on this, let's say, valid summary of what the Fit for 55 legislative package includes on the renewable energy, on the fuel EU, aviation, maritime. But don't worry, as transport people, we'll find our way. We of course rely now on energy, but when it comes to transport, we find our way to follow best practice, either from aviation, from road, or from maritime. So with all this, I would like to conclude with biofuels and turn to the next and final session, which is methanol.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are now on the final session, methanol. I hear everywhere. I mean, I was in a number of christening ceremonies of new buildings of saying that it's methanol ready, dual fuel, whatever. Methanol is becoming, it is for some time now quite popular in the shipping terminology. So let me turn to Dr. Mantiaris from the University of Houston to share with us your valuable contribution. The floor is yours.
Good day, everybody, and thank you for having me as a speaker. I apologize, my camera this morning decided to take the day off, although it was working yesterday. But let's go into the topic of discussion. First, let me tell you my credentials. I'm professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at the department chair at the University of Houston. I have experience in reaction engineering and also material synthesis. And I have served in addition to academia as program director at the National Science Foundation. So with that, let's go to the first slide, please. So this slide shows the various pathways that can be used to make methanol. In a famous book published by George Ola and co-workers on the methanol economy, it was proposed that methanol can be the ubiquitous liquid fuel to replace oil and gas in aspects of the energy economy. Today, methanol is made by steam reforming of natural gas or gasification of coal, primarily in China. And these sources have high CO2 or greenhouse gas footprint and are not allowed for the carbonization of shipping because they offer very little greenhouse gas reduction. And these are the pathways shown towards the bottom of the slide. These are the non-environmentally friendly, so to speak, pathways. For sustainable pathways, shown from the top towards the middle of the slide, methanol can be made from bio-based feedstocks, including gasification of on-purpose energy crops or bio-waste, capture of CO2 for reaction with clean or renewable hydrogen, or generation of synthesis gas from renewable natural gas, which has been proposed and implemented by Maersk for some sustainable shipping pilot programs. Biopathways are subject to the limited availability of appropriate feedstocks, high land use requirements for on-purpose energy crop production, as has already been discussed. And as a result, only a finite amount of methanol could be made from renewable from biomass. A finite amount could be made from renewable natural gas using conventional technologies, and this is indeed the sustainable supply route for many early projects. But renewable natural gas is of limited supply, capable of meeting less than 10% of energy demand with maximum development, and with many competing usage options. Its greenhouse gas reduction potential must consider the very high global warming potential of methane, from 25 to 110 times greater than CO2, depending on the time frame, such that deliberate production facilities from landfills or manure must provide industrial quality containment in low emission facilities. The United Kingdom currently requires a standard assumption of 1% methane leakage from biogas facilities, which is significant relative to targets of less than 0.2% for fossil natural gas production, with a range touted at 0.1% to greater than 2%. Key consideration here is whether the methane would be emitted from agricultural processes in the absence of biogas production, or whether the biogas is generated by on-purpose production. If we focus on the use of synthetic methanol made from atmospheric CO2, including that derived from direct air or seawater capture, where there are no limits of CO2 on CO2 feedstock, or water to generate renewable hydrogen, we may have some viable solutions. Iceland has proposed and partially demonstrated an economy based on sustainable synthetic methanol to power fishing fleets, and hosts the only commercial direct air CO2 capture facility provided by Climeworks, taking advantage of abundant geothermal energy. Capture of CO2 from point sources such as fossil power plants at high concentration is much easier than capture from the air at 450 ppm, with point source capture costs on the order of 20 to 200 tons to $200 per ton of CO2 versus 150 to 650 dollars per ton of CO2 for direct air capture. However, after reaction with hydrogen to make methanol as a fuel and then recombust it for ocean transport, this comprises at best a 50% reduction in CO2 footprint of CO2 from fossil point sources due to twice use of the CO2. In practice, the greenhouse gas reduction is much less because of the large amount of low carbon energy required to make the hydrogen required to convert CO2 back into sustainable methanol fuel. Capture of biogenic CO2 from high concentrations in the off-gas of bioethanol fermentation plants is highly attractive. However, these plants rely on first-generation biofuel production with high land use again, and hence are limited in ultimate supply, while second-generation bioethanol from biomass has been problematic due to process complexity and cost and has limited potential without. So where does this leave? Where does this leave us? This leaves us direct air or seawater capture of CO2 as the large-scale source for synthesis of methanol, augmented by some availability of biogas and bio-waste gasification. After this long introduction, let's go to the next slide. To remake fuel from CO2, which is the end product of combustion of fuel, it takes a lot of energy, including that needed to make the hydrogen, which is needed to make the methanol. As described in previous sessions, it is best to use low-cost renewable wind or solar energy directly as electricity with storage and batteries, but energy density is not high enough to use by far to use for shipping or other than in the smallest harbor craft, so very local. We need twice as much wind or solar capacity to make the same amount of energy into hydrogen as a marine fuel. Twice more energy is required to capture CO2 and react with hydrogen to form methanol, which requires at the end 4 times more solar or wind farms. The simplicity of using methanol as a fuel must overcome the fact that it takes twice the amount of energy as hydrogen and 4 times more than using the same amount of wind and solar to decarbonize global grids, which should be the first objective for a net zero global economy. There is a limited amount of high concentration of biogenic CO2 from the off-gas of bioethanol production from fermentation of corn or sugarcane syrup. But these are in limited amounts, highly dispersed sources with public pushback on pipelines for CO2 to obtain economies of scale. For this biogenic CO2, the preferred use will likely be synthetic aviation fuel, which can be made into a standard energy density hydrocarbon fuel and which can afford the high price and cost of production. Next slide, please. This is a slide you have seen before. Methanol, like biofuels, is a liquid at ambient conditions, can be stored in simple tanks such that the system density of the fuel itself and containment is essentially that of the fuel. Methanol's density is less than half, energy density is less than half that of marine fuel oil. The high oxygen content of the molecule means that it acts as a partially combusted hydrocarbon and thus has a lower heating value that requires adjustment of combustion engines to accommodate. Methanol can be condensed into dimethyl ether to provide energy density and reduce water solubility issues in handling, but this is an additional process step and adds energy burden and cost. Next slide, please. In terms of toxicity, methanol is much less toxic than ammonia, but can be confused by the public with ethanol as a biofuel, which is consumed as a beverage, as we know. And methanol can cause blindness if ingested, and there is odor if leaked or spilled into water resources with which it is miscible. While methanol is used as a blend with gasoline in China, many global fuel producers do not consider it safe for widespread use due to toxicity and odor. Use of methanol on board marine vessels can be implemented, but it will require training. Methanol is shipped today as a chemical, but crews for general marine transport would have to be trained in a similar way to those involved with chemical transport. Dimethyl ether, yes? Okay. Dimethyl ether has reduced toxicity, but higher concern over water resource contamination. And if in widespread use, the public concern and litigation over MTBE can be a similar concern. Let's go to the next slide. The next slides will move very quickly. This shows the synthetic methanol cost, which is actually high, but is projected to drop. Notice that the biomethanol cost is lower, but again has the problems in terms of the availability of feedstock. Let's go to the next slide. This is a slide you have seen before. So very quickly, this is a slide that shows that methanol comprising no more than 10% of future shipping. And right now, Maersk is the primary proponent of this fuel. Let's go to the next slide. And looking at the results from IRENA, likewise, we can find out that methanol comprises about 10% of shipping. And to summarize the pros and cons, methanol is an attractive fuel. It has an energy density that approaches half of today's marine fuel oil. It can be stored and handled like today's liquid fuels. Toxicity is an issue, but less so than ammonia. To be a low carbon fuel must be made from air or seawater capture of CO2 or from limited biogenic sources or bio-waste renewable gas. So it has certain advantages and certain disadvantages. So I will conclude here, and we'll be happy to discuss at the end.
Dr. Munzias, many thanks for your intervention. Well, I checked the weather in Houston, and it seems to be sunny today. So I hope that the reason of not appearing live is exactly your camera, not because you are lying in a park just opposite the university. But in any case, thank you for your intervention. So allow me to introduce now Dr. Diachristos for his intervention and valuable contribution on methanol.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is an honor to be in this podium, even virtually. And I would like to congratulate you and the organizers. This is a very complex nature, is a subject of very complex nature, such a nature that politicians don't like to touch. So the fact that you are touching upon these issues and that you announce that basically Cyprus would like to be the champion in promoting a green agenda and trying to also inform other member states about what they have to do. To me, it shows tremendous strength and courage by your side, so I would like to congratulate you. I am a professor of mechanical engineering at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. My background is combustion of different fuels. And starting with methanol, the previous speaker very nicely mentioned how we can sustainably produce methanol. I would like to put more emphasis on the usage of methanol, actually. So this is one of the major merits of methanol. It is a transparent fuel under atmospheric conditions, and this makes it very practical for vessels. And the next point is that it has a satisfactory energy density. So it has approximately half the energy density of MDO. If we can move to the next bullet, please. And next bullet, yes, exactly, is that in shipping regulations, methanol is classified as a so-called low flash point fuel. Those are the fuels that can be flammable under conditions on the vessel. So we need special rules and regulations how to transport them, how to use them on board the vessel. If we move next, again, the previous speaker very nicely, next slide, please, very nicely mentioned how we can synthesize methanol, what are the different pathways. I'm showing the same picture here, I mean, a picture that we have seen also before for other fuels. But what I would like to stress is that in terms of synthesis, methanol is a rather easy molecule to synthesize. That's why we are discussing about that compared, for example, to other biofuels, because it could be considered a biofuel when it is produced by biomass. But let's say the aspirational target about methanol synthesis is what we've heard before, is renewable hydrogen and direct air capture of CO2. And that would make it an e-methanol, which is part of the two different production pathways of green methanol. Now, the merits are that we have almost zero well-to-wake GWP when we produce green methanol. But of course, the costs today increase. We hope that the cost will go down, but this will depend really a lot on so this will depend a lot on the cost of renewable hydrogen and the cost of direct air capture of CO2. So allow me, with these few introductory words, to say a few of the most important, let's say, advantages of using methanol as a marine fuel and what I believe are the major weaknesses. Methanol is a chemically stable molecule, as I've said. It is a popular commodity today, as we've heard also about ammonia before. It is available in more than 100 ports globally. Today, gray and brown methanol, they are under industrialized production. So it means that there is security in the supply of methanol already today, even if it is the most green fuel, but we expect it to be in the future. We have shipping regulations in place for handling methanol already. And I think one of the most important assets is that there are commercial engines already available. And we've heard before that we are looking for fuels for the future. But the fact that we have technologies today for a fuel means that there is safety for the industry to invest in a new fuel that today can help decarbonizing the shipping sector, but is already available and safe to use today. It is also biodegradable, so if we have an accident, it will go into the water, it will dissolve quite fast, so we will have even less impacts than what we have with fuels that we have today. There are very good advantages of methanol as when we combust it as a fuel, because it is a very light molecule. It is readily miscible with air. It can combust very efficiently. It can combust in small engines and large engines, even with spark ignition or with pilot injection, as we've heard before. But now, in the case of methanol, pilot injection is only 5% maybe of the mass, not 30% that we had in the case of ammonia. Already today, even gray methanol on a tank to wake, it has 5 to 10% lower greenhouse gases than current fuels. So it can be used to fulfill the short-term requirements of lower greenhouse gases from the shipping industry. In the engines that we have, it leads to lower NOx, up to maybe 60. We have measured in the Stena Germanica lower 70% NOx emissions than MDO. It is compatible with the 0.1% SECA regulations. And I think what's very important is that it results to low black carbon, almost zero black carbon, and very low PM emissions. So also in terms of regulated pollutants, let's say, with the exception one that I'm going to come to, is a very clean fuel to combust. In terms of weaknesses, I think we heard about moderate toxicity. Of course, it requires more volume form storage, and for several vessel types, this means lower carrying capacity. It's a low flash point fuel, so it produces fire risk. It also has corrosive behavior, but I wouldn't say that this is too much of a problem, because as I've told you, we already have engines, and we need some more demanding safety system on board. We need cofferdams, we need monitoring of methanol, because as we've said, this is toxic. So if there is any leakage, we have to very fast address this leakage. The main problem in terms of this combustion is production of formaldehyde, is a strong carcinogenic. So we need to have special emission control in place to avoid formaldehyde, and we need regulations to mandate that formaldehyde will be monitored if we would like to make methanol one of the fuels of the future. So let me end with what I think are the main opportunities and the main threats for methanol. Today, methanol is a competitive price. That this is why already Maersk, as we've heard before, but also COSCO, they have ordered big containers vessels that will be operating on methanol. And I think the investment in decarbonizing shipping is not done anymore by the shipping industry. It will be done by the production industry, going from gray to green methanol. And another opportunity is that we also have direct methanol fuel cells, so it could even be used for smaller vessels or for auxiliary engines directly for in fuel cells. In terms of threats, I think we've heard before very clearly, also in case of biofuels, the availability of biomass is one of the limiting factors, and the cost of renewable hydrogen and direct air capture are the other limiting factors. Also, we heard about competition, about less price sensitive users like the road transport industry or the aviation industry. So obviously they will stress the availability of methanol for the marine sector. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for the attention.
Many thanks for your contribution. It seems that the prospects for methanol are on the bright side, like the weather today in Houston. But let's turn again to our QR code. Please scan to access to submit your valuable written comments. And at the same time, I would like to open the floor to our audience for interventions, remarks, contributions to the SWOT matrix. And I'm amazed to observe that the great number of viewers following us, virtually, are still with us. This is great after almost 3 hours. But please go ahead and let me get some interventions from the audience. Yes.
Methanol comes with a flexibility, mainly because it has been proved that it can be used on existing ships, and retrofitting cost is rather reasonable. So the owners do not spend a lot of money to upgrade their engines for using methanol. Gray methanol produces more CO2 if we consider the well-to-wake pathway, and definitely toxicity is a challenge, although it's less problematic than ammonia. Storage and handling is less complicated than the other fuel that we discussed. And definitely with regards to the low flash point, then this is something that should come with a new regulatory framework. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Thank you, Minister. Just some small remarks. In line with my previous intervention, methanol is a promising fuel, especially, let's say, for achieving the targets of Fit for 55. Of course, there is an interesting discussion. What is a net zero and what is an absolute zero fuel? So, methanol as biofuel is carbon-based fuel. That means it's not absolute zero. In Europe, they call themselves very ambitious, and they say that they are in favor of an absolute zero solution, at least for 55. What actually is the target is for carbon neutral Europe up to 2050. That means the use of net zero fuels is an option. And if you allow me, and before closing, because now we are in the final stage, personally, I'm in favor of ethanol mixed with water and some flavor. So, and I am in the same club with Dr. Kogalakis. We are the so-called Zivania consumers.
Bioethanol.
Well, the way you describe it is tempting to order it in a bar next door. So let's see.
Thank you, Minister.
Any other contribution, please?
Because we're going to finish in a while, I would say that I agree with Yannis about his chemistry. He looks very good chemist. All of these fuels, except hydrogen and ammonia, are carbon-based. When you burn them, you produce carbon dioxide. So it depends where you throw it. Also, methanol. To produce methanol, in order to have low carbon dioxide emissions, it means that you're going to use green hydrogen or blue hydrogen with carbon dioxide storage. So we're back to the same problem. So the mother fuel, as Mr. John said, is hydrogen. So whatever we think, we have to go back to hydrogen and rethink the rest. This is just.
I think this summer I will have a crash course in a summer school on chemistry. I mean, it's very tempting, but okay. Alexander.
Just 2 words, and I see it on the strength. I see methanol and biofuels. If I go back, being favored in terms of the immediate regulations, the carbon intensity indicator, and that's where they have the strength. But long term, I don't see these two fuels dominating the shipping industry.
Okay.
I just want to pose a risk from methanol that was not mentioned on the handling and storage of methanol. Methanol can be corrosive in many parts of engines, like elastomers, O-rings, etc. And also when you touch with water, you know, many fuels contain water, it can cause stress corrosion cracking on the tanks, the steel tanks. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this as a
Thanks. But let me ask a ship owner. I mean, let's say it's time to a new part of your fleet in next year. You have to order a new building. So, and will you go for methanol? I mean, will you go for what? I mean, because you have to renew part of your fleet in 2-3 years time. The life cycle possibly of a ship is around 15 years. So will you go for methanol? So what is, how do you plan to approach it? I don't know if there's a ship owner on stage or is following us virtually. What considerations will he or she will take? Is that the SWOT matrix that we have on our screen adequate? Is something else to add?
Just like to add that I think the biggest threat for methanol is ammonia and the regulatory system that promote ammonia a lot. On the other hand, ship owners tend to like methanol because it's more available, easier to handle, safer maybe. And my feeling is that the leading companies like Maersk and other companies that are leaders in the market, they tend to preempt a little bit the regulatory system by promoting their own investments in methanol. So I think that this is a big comparison to be made between methanol and ammonia.
Yes, John.
Thank you. Methanol has a big advantage compared to the other three fuels that we examined today. Actually, for now, biofuels, I can say that have also the same advantage. There are no rules for the design of ships with hydrogen and ammonia. Formally, for methanol, there is circular MSC 1621 that gives you a very good idea of what to do when you design such a ships regarding venting, rate of handling, etc. But methanol is also associated with some disadvantages. It is very flammable, as probably it's a weakness, and we require inerting the surface of the tank, and more importantly, because it is very flammable as well, we need to put a cofferdam minimum 600 millimeters width around the tank. That means that we lose space, and the storage space for methanol is quite more than other fuels because it has relatively low energy density. It's about 20 megajoule per kilogram methanol. Also, methanol, green methanol is a very low percentage of the total production, 0.2%
yeah.
of the total production.
Well, now it's time to check, to reconfirm the great capabilities of the PwC Experience Center. We have a person intervening, I mean, online virtually. I think it's Captain Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the excellent presentations. You asked what a ship owner is considering regarding the fleet renewal. It's very difficult for the ship owner, and provided the vessel is not a dedicated vessel doing short sea transportation, where it is possible to go with diesel electric in combination with battery or with hydrogen. For the deep sea transportation, it is almost impossible for a ship owner to find a solution. A ship owner also considers what will be the future expenses, and all the new fuels, alternative fuels, as we have discussed today, they come at a considerable cost. Are we able to pass on these considerable costs at the end to the society, which at large is already struggling to sustain the daily expenses for electricity, mobility, food, etc. So are we able to do that? And that's why ship owners today, they go with regard to renewable energies and alternative fuels for structured programs where they can lock the long-term transportation contract, where they take all the stakeholders within the project and they have a really long-term planning. That's workable. And then any of the fuels has its application, depending on where you go. Tramping, like we do with the multi-purpose vessels or with bulk carriers, is very, very difficult with the new fuels. And we need cross-border research and collaboration. And we hope that the fund which will be generated allows that all stakeholders are taken on board, so that you find ultimately for the ocean transportation the reasonable cost structure, as well as the overall reduction in CO2. So the answer, a ship owner is totally confused, Mr. Minister, and too difficult.
I know, Captain Adami, and thank you for addressing the usual battle between short sea and deep sea shipping. That's why I mentioned in the very beginning that it's worth examining the appropriateness of each fuel technology in different distances and longer or shorter routes. We have another intervention from the audience here, yes?
Mr. Adam, I think
Captain Adami.
Captain Adami, he's pretty much right. It's a very difficult decision for a ship owner today to decide which technology ship he's going to buy. First of all, it doesn't exist already to buy one. So until the technologies will be fully developed for a ship owner to clarify which technology is the best, I mean, during this transition period, at least the only thing that he wants to do is to save fuel and reduce its emissions. The only technology, and we have it in Cyprus, is the HHO technology. So if anybody's interested to save fuel and reduce their emissions until he decides what to buy, we're here to help.
No. Well, I mentioned at the very beginning that it's our responsibility to provide, to prepare and create the framework conditions in this short-term period for operational and technical measures. And if you have a closer look to what we are doing in Cyprus, we are trying to support and incentivize the shipping community to cope with the challenges in the short term. And because it's very important also to create this mentality of the greening among our shipping community. So I would like to invite back to the stage for, we have a final intervention. Yes. Yes.
I was just wondering, because I very much agree with my friend Chris on the comments he made on methanol, but I don't know whether the subject is being enhanced a little bit on all the subjects that we have discussed today. and to revisit the hydrogen issue for a very short time. And I wanted to focus a little bit on the question of the cost, as it was announced earlier on. So if we assume, for instance, that we have a €6 or $6 per kilogram cost of the fuel, and if we consider that this is, it could be divided by 3.5 to turn it into equivalent diesel liter, so we're talking about 1.6 equivalent diesel liter. At the moment, we are buying about 1.85 or something like that, our fuels at the taps. So, of course, this is very expensive for the United States, but for Europe in general, where the cost of fuel on the tap, on the pumps is around €2 per liter. This is even cheaper. So I would say that we don't really need to go down to the 4 euros or to the €2 per kilogram to have affordable hydrogen. So that's a clarification I wanted to make. I want also to say that it's been a very, very interesting afternoon, very informative. I congratulate you for your initiative. And lastly, I just wanted to make give an information or an announcement, if you like, that we are already at this very moment licensing a facility in Cyprus to produce and distribute hydrogen. Hopefully it's going to be in operation by 2024, producing about 150 tons a year. So that's going to be a pilot. It is a pilot project, but it's more than a pilot, considering that neither in Greece or in Israel, for instance, produce anything more than that, because that's equivalent to fuel about 20 buses on a continuous daily trip of about 350 or 400 kilometers a day.
Great to hear that. Great news. Well, let's have back on stage Chris and online Dr. Moudiaris and Dr. Giachristos. I will give 1 minute to each of you to conclude because it's been a long day. But let's have first Chris to make his comments and to ask even our 2 scene setters to respond.
Yeah, so look, like everything we looked at today, there are opportunities with methanol as well. I think my takeaway is, again, multiple pathways to production and the fact that it can be competitively priced. There are public concerns on the threat side. There is toxicity as a weakness, which also brings back the public concerns. But there are quite a lot of strengths on methanol. And
it's obvious. The left side of the matrix.
And I will tell you, online, it was the same. We were having a lot more on the strengths and opportunities. Now, there's more information still coming in. And as you said, we will compile all of this. But I am interested to see that the strengths and the opportunities of methanol don't necessarily reflect the popularity of methanol in the market. So yeah, that's my takeaway.
So let's turn to Mr. Dr. Moudiaris for his observations and final remarks.
Yeah, I agree about the promising aspects of methanol.
And sorry, where are you now? In the park or in your office?
I'm in the pool right now.
Okay.
Enjoying the nice weather. No, it's not that warm in Houston. But what I want to mention about methanol has potential. Its potential might increase depending on the local infrastructure and also the availability of energy resources, like, for example, geothermal, as it has been used in Iceland. But I would like to add one more thread. If methanol can be produced sustainably, then we can use methanol for olefins or jet fuel, which is a higher valued product or products than marine fuel. So there are other industries that may tap into this. So that's a hidden threat. Otherwise, I see this as a promising and competitive alternative.
Many thanks.
Thank
many
you for
thanks.
having. Thank you for having me, and apologies for not having video.
No, no
I would
worries,
have
no
shown
worries. Enjoy the
I
sunny
would have
weather.
shown you. Yeah, I
So-
would have shown you how beautiful Houston is.
Okay, let's turn to beautiful Thessaloniki and to Dr. Diachristos for his final remarks and comments.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I'm in Tampere, Finland, not in Thessaloniki, so it's rather cold here. But let me tell you my concluding words. I think I've already said in my presentation, and you've asked the Deputy Minister before, what the shipping industry thinks. And if I would like to be in their shoes or in their sails, maybe, they need low capital investment, low capital cost investment, and security. And I think this is why big companies have already invested in methanol, because it is available, it requires very little in additional investment compared to any of the other fuels that we discussed today. And the greening of the fleet will happen outside of the vessel. So that's what they like. They make an investment today. The fuel is not green today, but they expect that the fuel will become green in the future without additional investment, CapEx investment from their side. Of course, the risk is OpEx, as with every other of the fuels that we've discussed today when we want them to become green. So I'm just trying to explain why you see the left-hand side of this graph being heavier than the right-hand side of the graph. Thank you very much.
Clear. Well, Chris, it's time to conclude. And I will just remind everybody why we are doing this. We're doing this to contribute to a positive change. This is what Cyprus is committed about when it comes to shipping. We are doing this to enlighten the discussions at global and European level on the way forward. Because once we have a fund established, then the next question is, do we have the right governance in place? Whether we are going to prioritize the X-fuel technology vis-a-vis the Y. So that's why today you are leaving this space, and I will refer to that space later. You are leaving this space with 4 takeaways. 4 SWOT analysis on hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, and biofuels. But what's next from us is that in a few days' time, early February, you will receive a detailed set of conclusions with the SWOT matrix, and you will be able to upload on YouTube the whole discussion of today. And the aim is to share with all of you our conclusions, but also with the regulators globally and within the EU. But since we are reaching to the end, let me thank some important contributors to make all this happen today. First of all, our host, the PwC Experience Center, which I must say the last 2 days, my experience there, I can confirm that this place here supports my personal motto, which is impossible is often the untried. And I do value what they are doing here. They do an excellent job. And let me congratulate. I will refer now to names: Philippos, Cleo, Maria, Yannis, Dimitris, Dimitrios, Konstantina, Theoni, and Georgia for what they are doing. They are incredible. Next, of course, is our partners, which I consider now the University of Houston, and especially the Division of Energy and Innovation as our partners, not only in this exercise, but possibly in many more exercises to come. So allow me to thank and congratulate Chris, Joe, Mike, and Lakis from the Sunny Houston of their support, their contribution in today's exercise. And last but not least, allow me to congratulate my dream team in the Shipping Deputy Ministry, which I'm very proud of. Is my permanent secretary, Mrs. Yana Tanu Haralambus, an incredible director of handling all the green and safety and security agenda in the Shipping Deputy Ministry, Mr. John F. Stradiu. His team, which is Yannis, Kostas, Valentinos, Yannis, and of course, Christina, from all their hard work. And I would also like to thank a lot our panelists coming from Greece, John, Dimitrios, and Leonidas, that they were live with us. And just a final word from me, a final promise, because after all, I'm also a politician and I need to make some promises, but we have demonstrated that in this small country, Cyprus, when it comes to shipping, we deliver. So if you follow our strategy, what we've been doing the last couple of years when it comes to shipping, what we can promise, Dr. Jachristos mentioned something about being champions. No, our aim is not to become champions, but is to contribute to a positive change, to strive for excellence in this country when it comes to shipping, and support this industry to thrive for the years to come. And we do know well our role. As regulators, we have to be facilitators. Thanks a lot for your patience, for your support. Thank you.